Hello there, Eddie Mercado here with BloodyElbow.com, and welcome to the 6th Round Retro. The date, July 19th, 2008. The event, Affliction Banned. This was Fedor Emelianenko versus Tim Sylvia for the WAMA heavyweight title. The venue was the Honda Center in Anaheim, California, and my co-host for today is none other than top flight combat sports journalist Fraser Coffeen. Fraser, Happy New Year, and how are you, sir?
Happy New Year, Eddie. I'm good. Good to see you, man.
Good to see you as well. Did you have a good New Year? Do anything cool?
No, I don't do anything cool. I'm old and lame, and I went to bed at like 9 o'clock, and that's how it goes. And it's just that's just fine. But that's all right. It's all good.
It is all good because we're starting off 2018 in proper fashion with a 6-round retro for this Affliction, the first ever Affliction card. Now, this will be a 2-part series. There were only 2 events for Affliction before the infamous Josh Barnett situation and the whole promotion went under and ended up selling all its rights to the UFC, as most promotions did after they died. So, man, let's just dive right into this super fun card. The commentators were pretty good. You had Jay Glazer, Frank Trigg, and Big John McCarthy. Kind of interesting seeing Big John outside of the cage and rocking a mic. It was odd, but kind of cool. Like he was good at it,
Yeah, he did a good job. And I think that speaks to kind of the overall level here. I mean, there's a good level of production and stuff on this show. I think it's interesting. It's interesting going back because I remember when this happened in, like you said, in 2008. This card was a big deal, not just for the fights, but for what it represented. The last time that you and I did one of these, we talked about the end of Pride 33, which had been a little bit before this, and so there was this sort of idea, I think, at this time that the UFC was kind of really clearly the only game in town. There was Elite XC, but we all knew that was kind of we enjoyed it, but we knew that it was something a little bit silly. This was oh, wait, there's another promotion trying to be a real promotion and trying to pick up what Pride's doing and be in the US. It was a really big deal, and it felt like it was potentially going to be actual, could be some actual competition to the UFC.
Yeah, and so it's owned by Affliction Entertainment, who Tom Atencio had this clothing promotion called Affliction, and basically, they were capitalizing on the MMA boom. So they had, a smorgasbord of fighters repping Affliction clothing, coming to the octagon and whatnot. I mean, they were like Tap Out 2.0. They were like the number one clothing line, just bringing in a boatload of money. Well, I'm not sure the specifics of it or for whatever reason, but Affliction and the UFC had a falling out. So the UFC banned Affliction clothing from being worn by their fighters. Hence the name Affliction Banned. So Atencio goes off and starts his own promotion. He's like, F you guys, I don't need y'all. There's plenty of other fighters out here in the world. I got a little bit of a financial backing. Let me go ahead and dump some money into this new promotion and kind of just see what happens. So we get Affliction Banned. It's almost like a spite promotion, just to give it to the UFC, But it was a big deal. They dropped a bunch of money in it. They had Bruce Buffer's brother, Michael Buffer, doing the announcing in the ring, which is crazy because at the time, Michael Buffer was like the end all be all as far as commentators go, or as far as ring announcers go. I mean, he was doing his thing in boxing. I think he was getting like $1 million every time he said, "Let's get ready to rumble." I mean, he was the man when it came to announcing. So for them to splurge for that alone was kind of a big deal. Outside of that, you had your Fedor Emelianenkos. You have Tim Sylvia, who at the time was coming off of fighting for the UFC interim title. He lost to Nogueira. So it's like Fedor versus someone who is fresh out of a UFC heavyweight title fight. Who's the baddest man on the planet kind of thing. That was going on. You had Josh Barnett, who it's his return to US soil. He was over in Japan for the longest time. So there's a lot of different things going on here. And it was a Megadeth concert also, they splurged on Megadeth.
It's It's so funny. Like I had forgotten about the Megadeth aspect, and it starts, and they've got Megadeth there playing at the beginning. I'm like, oh, it's like the classic mistake that MMA promoters and pro wrestling promoters will make time and time again to say, let's put a concert on in the middle. Well, this is the beginning, but right on our pay-per-view. We do not want that. We do not want the concert on the pay-per-view. And yet, if you're going to have one, if you're going to insist on it, having Megadeth play Symphony for Destruction while the fighters are coming out and sort of fist bumping right in front of Megadeth, it's probably the best you can possibly hope for in terms of a concert moment. It was acceptable.
And Megadeth was so appropriate for Affliction clothing. Like the people wearing Affliction, they listen to Megadeth. You know what I mean? And aside from that, the stars were out. We had Donald Trump and Jenna Jameson, Tito Ortiz, Stone Cold Steve Austin. I mean, all these sort of sports athletes were in attendance.
Yeah.
And I mean, this really had a pride feel, right?
Well, exactly. That's what you like. You use the exact right phrase there. It's a pride feel. I think it's a very deliberate choice that they opted to go with a ring instead of a cage. You know, Elite XC is around at this time. They're in a cage. Strike Force is in their early stages here. They're in a cage. Affliction comes around and they say, no, we're going ring. Because they knew that there was that gap out there for certain hardcore fans that the death of Pride had left for people. And they're absolutely sitting here saying, that's who we're going for. This was a show for the hardcore fans who were unhappy that Pride was gone. And this was to lure them away from the UFC. No doubt about it. The ring is just one of the ways that they made that crystal clear, along with just the nature of who they booked.
Yeah, absolutely. Such a good card. Well, let's just start right at the top of the billing. Fedor Emelianenko took on Tim Sylvia. This is for the WAMA heavyweight title. WAMA, the World Alliance of Mixed Martial Arts, was not a promotional belt. It was just kind of, almost like it was above any promotion. It was like the unofficial authority, the unofficial official authority of like all MMA, basically. So, Fedor comes out, right? And at this point in time, this is when Fedor is a Sambo god, like untouchable, 16-0-1 in Pride, beating like the best of the best, like Mark Hunt, Fujita, Coleman, Heath Herring, Simi Schilt, Randleman, Tsuyoshi Kasaka, Crow Cop, Big Nog twice, you know what I mean? But also like freak show fights like Zulu Zeno and Hongman Choi, and like he is fighting everybody. And this is as prime as you get when you see Fedor. Unfuckwithable at this point, period.
Yeah, he's God at this point. He's Fedor. He's like you want to talk about mystique that fighters have, like the mystique of Fedor is in full force here. And it's powerful. He's this, this crazy guy who lives out in, the middle of nowhere in Russia and is like a cyborg that like can't even be stopped. I mean, his highlights are insane. He's got that amazing highlight that if you've never seen it is just incredible, where Kevin Randleman just dumps him like right on his head in a suplex that seems like it would paralyze anyone. And then like a minute later, he subs Randleman. He's fine. It's fine. No big deal. He's incredible at this point. And I think, again, the big thing here is that the UFC had been flirting with him for a little while at this point, really since the death of Pride, and they could never make it happen. They couldn't do it because Fedor, his manager, they had a deal with M1 promotion, and they would want to do co-promotion. So M1 is a co-promoter of this Affliction show because that's what happens when you get Fedor on. You get an M1 co-promotion, and the UFC was never into that. So the UFC never made it happen. And still to this day, never made it happen. There's no denying that he is. There's not even any question about the fact that he is the biggest MMA star in history to never get his spot in the octagon. And here is Affliction again saying, hey, MMA fans, you guys who want Fedor, you want to see him? We got him. Here he is. His U.S. debut. He's here on pay-per-view. Like, this is a big deal to be able to have him here.
Yeah, he's as big as it gets. It does not get any bigger. And on the other side, you have Tim Sylvia coming in. And so, like, the backstory with Sylvia is, so he gets into the UFC on this crazy tear, and he's destroying people left and right. He faces Frank Mir for the heavyweight belt. gets his arm snapped in the process, technically submitted, goes on to beat Wes Sims outside of the UFC because, as we know, it all goes back to Wes Sims.
Always Wes Sims.
And he challenges Arlovski for the interim belt. Frank Mir had to vacate after his motorcycle accident. And Arlovski club and subs him, drops him with the big overhand right, drops down for an ankle lock. Beautiful, like a beautiful sequence. So a little bit of bad luck for Sylvia there, right? So he goes on and wins 3 fights, comes back and knocks out Arlovski in the rematch, winning his belt back. Okay, so he faces Arlovski again, beats him in a real boring decision, defends his belt like twice, and then Randy Couture comes back out of retirement like an OG, beats him, takes his belt from him. Sylvia goes on to face Brandon Vera, and then he gets another shot at the title, interim title. Randy's doing his contractual things with the UFC, kind of at odds with them. So the UFC, it's like, whatever, we're going to do an interim heavyweight title between Big Nog, Sylvia. Sylvia gets submitted in the 3rd round. And then from there, you know, he goes on to fight the GOAT, that is Fedor. So kind of a weird little road that got Sylvia to this fight.
Yeah, and I think a key piece in that road is what happened after the Nogueira fight, which is that that's the end of his UFC contract, and this is timely for the world of MMA today, he chooses to walk from the UFC at that point, which is pretty unheard of at that time. I can't tell you anybody else who at that time period.
Well, Andrei Arlovski, but
Arlovski, yes, who we'll get to. Yes, that's a good point. There's one other. But, you know, he bails because he's interested in pursuing other options, which we're seeing nowadays with Bellator. But especially with Pride out of the picture, that was just like, what are you doing? What are those? Where are you going to go? There aren't other options. But obviously, he showed that it was a choice here. I will say this, for Tim Sylvia as well. He was in a weird spot here because on the one hand, he was sort of much maligned for his willingness. He had no problem going out there and putting on a terrible fight as long as he won. Like that was A-okay in his book. But so there was a lot of hatred towards him. But it was interesting. By the time this Fedor fight came around, he had almost like rounded the horn and become this like hipster pick for like great heavyweight. If you're really down with MMA, you got to appreciate Tim Sylvia, like this, as you kind of stroke your goatee. Like he was kind of like in this
cult icon, so to speak,
in this weird sort of way. Yeah. Because despite having these like pretty boring fights against like a lot of people, he did get the job done. And I mean, at this time, when this fight is happening, he is, depends on what you think the status of Randy Couture is. Randy Couture he's not retired at this point, but he's inactive. Let's call him active. In which case, the only heavyweights in the world that are better than Tim Sylvia at this stage that this fight happens are Fedor, Big Nog, and Couture. He's number 4 heavyweight in the world. I don't see anybody else that you could feasibly put above him at the time that this fight happens. He's a big deal. Now he goes down fast after this, but because this next fight is a loss to Ray Mercer, which that's not worth talking about. But at this moment, he was hot stuff in a weird, strange way.
Yeah, like nobody was counting him out 100%.
No, there were a lot of people who picked him. People thought that he could win this. And it's weird because like you said, Fedor had those freak show fights. And I think in retrospect, some people lumped Tim Sylvia in there in those like, who did he ever beat? He beat Zuluzino and Hongman Choi and Tim Sylvia. That's garbage. This was not a freak show fight by any means. This was major. This was two of the 5 best heavyweights in the world going at it. I mean, this was a big deal. Now, by going at it, I mean one pummeling the other one in 30 seconds and choking him out. But that's what you get when it's Fedor.
Yeah, man, Fedor's stance was so elegant to me. Like the way he just moved and like measured his opponents with his hands. Yeah. Like his rhythm and his cadence was just so fun to watch. And I mean, the fight was so quick. Like Fedor comes out and basically lands a leaping left hook. They clinch up, and then Fedor just spazzes out and unleashes this like 7-punch hook combo, like from the hip, like just these as big of a punch as he could throw. And like Fedor or Sylvia just had no time to react. He was still like thinking about the clinch, and he just got punched 7 times in the mouth. So of course he buckles in on himself. Fedor takes his bag, starts punching him, sinks the hooks, muscles a rear naked choke, and Sylvia taps 36 seconds into the fight.
Yeah, it's
like,
rough.
It's like what you expect. Like, oh, you're the baddest man on the planet? Prove it. And he did just that. He waxed. And here's the thing. So this is not a freak show fight like you were saying. Sylvia is freshly removed from the UFC title, heavyweight title fight, in which he was really competitive up until he got submitted there in the 3rd round. So this is, for everything considered, this is the title for the baddest man on the planet. And Fedor, he took the title and then some, like this really solidified Fedor as just the myth, the legend. Like there is not even human at this point. He reached God status.
Yeah, it is an amazing performance in how it's just so dominant. And it's interesting. There's such different guys in their sort of way that they have their emotions. Fedor is, of course, so stoic. That's kind of the joke of him, right? Is that, he's never any expression. There's a great shot. I can't remember what fight it is, but at some point earlier in the night, they cut back to the locker room, and Fedor and his buddies are just playing cards. Like that's how he's getting ready, because that's just Fedor. And Sylvia is a guy who always really wore his emotions on his sleeve. And one of the things that really sticks with me in this show is Sylvia's emotion at the end when he loses, because he's just, like you said, he's just so frustrated, and you can tell that what he's so frustrated about is that he just never even got in it. Like it's not even like the Nog fight where he fought 3 rounds and then he got caught. He was never at any moment in the fight, and
he wasn't ready. He wasn't ready.
No, he just blitzes him and it's over. And he's just like, and Tim Sylvia's just like, ugh, man, sucks.
Yeah, it's like he had this look like, man, I knew that was gonna happen.
Yeah.
He's like, I knew that was gonna happen, but I didn't think it really was. But shit, it just did.
Yeah,
like epic, such an epic fight.
It's great,
man. And the craziest part, so after this, Fedor was on the microphone, and he announces he wants to fight Randy Couture, who is, arguably the other baddest man on the planet, if you asked anybody at the time. And Couture was actually in the building. So they bring Couture into the ring, and we had finally seen these 2 icons, heavyweights, face to face for like the first time. I mean, like literally like 2 feet from each other. And in my opinion, this goes down as the greatest MMA tease of all time. Hands down. We thought we were so close to getting it. You got Randy in this another promotion. Like maybe he can get free from his UFC contract, and then we'll see Fedor and Randy. Like it's going to happen. It's going to happen. And then it just doesn't.
Yeah, it's a real bummer. We wanted this fight so bad. It would have been so awesome, and it just never happened. And it's a real loss that it just never ever materialized. Because Couture, right? He was dealing with all this contractual stuff with the UFC. But to be clear, he was the UFC heavyweight champion at this time. He kind of said that he wasn't, because he said, "Oh, I'm just not going to fight for the UFC anymore." But the UFC is like, "Well, your contract disagrees with you on this, buddy," and the courts agreed with the contract, as they tend to do. So yeah, he's the UFC heavyweight champion at this time, whether it's acknowledged or not. And there he is in the ring with the greatest. And we thought we were going to see it, and we didn't. And
damn the UFC for that. Damn them. They really screwed all of us out of something epic. And Randy's still upset about that. I think he might even still be involved in a lawsuit with the UFC over that. But so just for the record, for my personal opinion, Fedor would have cleaned Randy's clock on the feet at that time. My personal, just for the record, that's my, everyone is entitled to their own opinion. But if they had fought, I would have gone with Fedor all day on that.
I love both of them. 2 of my favorites of all time. I would have picked Fedor too.
It's just the way it is. So Fedor, he goes on to face Andrei Arlovski at the next Affliction event, Affliction 2 Day of Reckoning. But we'll get to that on next week's show.
That's a teaser for our 2-parter of the complete Affliction, because it only takes 2 parts to do the
complete anthology.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So Tim Sylvia, on the other hand, like you mentioned, he goes on to get KO'd by a former boxing champion, Ray Mercer, in just an epic shit show from start to finish. The whole lead up, like they were supposed to box, and then they couldn't get sanctioned, so they did an MMA fight, and Sylvia got knocked out in like 8 seconds or something embarrassing. He went on to have a fourth fight with Andrei Arlovski. It was terrible. Like they actually had real beef going on at the time with like an ex-girlfriend or something like that. Terrible, terrible, terrible. He lost 3 more fights after that, and then retired in 2013. Now he did try to fight again, but actually was never able to get healthy or cleared to actually get sanctioned. So that's the last we've seen of Tim Sylvia. Hopefully,
he's still poking around on Twitter, sort of commenting on things every once in a while. So
that's fine by me. If I'm going to see him anywhere, it's definitely behind a keyboard.
Absolutely,
I'm on board with that.
Okay, so speaking of Arlovski, that brings us to our next excellent fight.
So we have Andrei Arlovski in the co-main event defeating Ben Rothwell by knockout at 1 minute and 13 seconds of round 3, of course, in the heavyweight division. Now, so Arlovski came into this after, well, let's back up. So Arlovski, he gets knocked out brutally back-to-back in the UFC by Rico Rodriguez and Pedro Hizzo. Then he goes on to finish 6 straight opponents in the UFC's heavyweight division. 6 straight finishes. No one talks about that anymore. No one talks about the time that Arlovski finished 6 straight heavyweights. No one mentions that. But he does. He goes on, he beats 6 guys, finishes 6 guys in a row, including Tim Sylvia, to win the heavyweight belt, defends his title twice. One of those guys he knocked out was Justin Eilers, the late Justin Eilers. He's kind of the theme. He's like the overlapping, everyone's fought Justin Eilers on this card, it seems like. But so he wins the belt, right? And then he goes on and he loses to Tim Sylvia in their rematch, loses the really bad and boring rubber match. And he goes on a 3-fight winning streak and then leaves the UFC for greener pastures. Another guy that you mentioned, Tim Sylvia, bounced on the UFC for more money. So did Andrei Arlovski. He felt like he knew his worth and he wasn't getting it. And oddly enough, this is one of the situations where the UFC was actually pretty cool. Like the UFC and Andrei Arlovski have always had this healthy relationship, it seems. Like he's been in and out of the organization several times, never seemed to have bad blood with Dana or anyone behind the scenes. So it's kind of a really unique situation for someone who, leaving the business and coming back and leaving and coming back to just have such good rapport with, the brass.
He's an interesting one. I think there's it's interesting that, of course, he and Sylvia fought 4 times because there really there's a lot of parallels at this point in their careers. They eventually sort of spread off in their different directions. But at this point, they're on a very similar track in that, like Sylvia, Arlovski's a former UFC champ here. And like Sylvia, he had some performances that people were none too pleased with. He was kind of gun shy and tentative after he had lost the belt to Sylvia. That led to that really boring, like we said, rubber match. And it led to some other performances that were not all that exciting, but impressive. Like during this period, he beats Fabricio Verdum, which is a huge deal. Like that's very impressive, but it's kind of boring too. It's not great. So he was in this kind of funky period. And then this fight is really his return to being awesome. And whereas Sylvia here is at the end of the line of sort of relevance, Arlovski decides to sort of, whatever has been plaguing his head, making him tentative, making him not fight to his best, it is not there here because he is a killer in this fight. It's awesome.
Yeah, he comes in straight savage. And interesting note, this is the first time Arlovski fought in a ring versus a cage. Mm-hmm. So I thought that was a little unique. They mentioned that on the broadcast. Rothwell, on the other hand, he came in 29-5. So he had a lot of fights, but they weren't exactly against the top names, So there was a lot of criticism going around about Rothwell's legitimacy as an elite heavyweight. Now, he came in on a 13-fight winning streak, including wins over Rico Rodriguez, Pat Miletich, Duke Rufus were in his corner. So, you know, he had some backing behind him, coming from a strong camp. Just kind of, this was like his first big step up in competition. And it was a huge step up. Arlovski was just way more polished in this fight. I mean, so much more faster. I mean, just so much more sharp on the feet, like slipping punches, bobbing and weaving, attacking the leg. And Rothwell really just trying to land a big right hand and looking to clinch up and just kind of grab Arlovski. But, I mean, this was Arlovski all day, each round.
Yeah, this was a great fight. I loved this fight. This is my pick for fight of the night. I thought it was great. It was a great performance from Arlovski. Rothwell had his moments particularly in the second round when he gains top control and gets some advantage. He gains top control due to a really stupid decision from Arlovski to when he's on top and he decides, I'll dive back for a heel hook, which is a terrible choice. But that's how he won the belt from Sylvia, so he feels it's a great tool in his arsenal. It's not a great tool to be using. And Rothwell's like, oh, you're going to just get off of me and lay on your back? Well, then I'll lay on top of you and punch you.
Real quick, I think that's a two-parter there because he won the title that way with that leg lock.
Yeah.
He also knocked out Petapana from that position.
That's true.
If you recall, he was going for the leg lock and like punched him from his back on the restart. Crazy. Sorry, go ahead though.
He likes the leg lock. But so Ben Rothwell did have his moments. But yeah, Arlovski he just beats him down here, you know. Rothwell's tough as nails, so he doesn't go down easily. But eventually in the third round, Arlovski does stop him, and he stops him in that sort of brutal way. To me, it's the most brutal kind of knockout, that it's not like that one clean punch or that one clean shot. It's just like he's just beating him so badly that Rothwell just cannot continue. There's just no possible way for him to go on. And he just collapses, and that's it. And, you know, anybody who's watched Ben Rothwell fight knows that it takes a lot to make Ben Rothwell go down like that. But Arlovski puts it on here. For my money, this is the peak of Andrei Arlovski. This period right here is him at his absolute best. He's fine-tuned the like sort of quick savagery that he had during that impressive win streak and heavyweight title run that you talked about. And he's kind of refined it a little bit and become more technical and really, really impressive.
I kind of feel like his peak was when he clubbed and subbed Sylvia to win the belt.
I hear you.
But you're right though. This was the Renaissance Arlovski. Yeah. Round two, you know, he after he got knocked out by Sylvia in their rematch, he really became a really boring fighter to watch. Like he was so worried about losing that he was just fighting every second just to not lose. And that really translated into a stale fighting style. So you're right. This is when he finally exercised those mental demons and finally, you know, remember that he's a monster and he is technically better than 90% of these guys out here. And you know, he can do things like this. But, you know, that second round, as you mentioned, Rothwell had his moments. So he finds top position, and he's landing really nice elbows from the top. He's working. But for whatever reason, the referee stands them up in, like, the final 20 seconds. And I, like, really disagree with that. They should not have stood that up. I think Rothwell was doing enough damage from full guard to where they should have kept it there.
Yeah,
and it's crazy because, in my opinion, Rothwell was winning that round up until the stand-up, and then Arlovski goes ham in the last 15 seconds, just, I mean, throwing every single tool he had at Big Ben. I mean, punches, head kicks, flying knees, like the whole shebang, winning back the round in my eyes. So I feel like he got a little bit of a raw deal with that stand-up, but, you know, you can't argue with the outcome. You know, the overhand right uppercut, left hook combination was just beautiful. I mean, it was seamless.
It was nice. I agree. Bad stand up, but yeah, it was seamless. You're right. He does hit a beautiful flying knee in there, which is a beautiful prequel to what will come next time. We'll be back with the Arlovski flying knee in a week.
Yeah, so Arlovski, he goes on to knock out the granite chin of Roy Nelson in Elite XC. And then after that, he goes on to fight Fedor at Affliction 2, Day of Reckoning, which we will discuss next week. But just so you know, he's currently the number 12 heavyweight in the UFC, coming off of a win and slated to face Stefan Struve at UFC 222 in March. So he's still, top 15 heavyweight in the world because that's what heavyweight does,
He's still in there. He just beat that guy with the diaper. It was great.
Junior Albini, was that him?
Yeah, that was the one.
So Rothwell, he went on to sign with the UFC and get absolutely baptized by Cain Velasquez. That was UFC 104 in 2009. By the way, Arlovski and Cain Velasquez are the only two fighters that have ever knocked out Ben Rothwell in a professional MMA fight. So that just goes to show exactly what kind of firepower it takes to put away a guy like Rothwell. Rothwell's been in the UFC ever since. Recently got flagged by USADA ahead of his fight with Fabricio Verdum. So he's kind of in limbo right now. So who knows when we'll see him back in the cage. All right, so before that, we had an infamous rematch here, a little bit of a grudge match, some retribution, if you will. Josh Barnett defeated Pedro Hizzo by brutal left hook knockout, 1 minute and 44 seconds of the second round. This was a rematch from UFC 30 back in 2001, where Hizzo, he picked up one of these video game knockouts where, like, he staggered Barnett, and Barnett is just kind of looking all dazed, and then Pedro sneaks in from the side and just knocks him out cold. One of the best knockouts you'll ever see. Like, at this point in time, if you watched one of the UFC's greatest knockouts, one of those shows or something, this was going to be somewhere in the top 10, top 15. Like, that's how good it was. So this was a chance for Barnett to get his payback, if you will. Coming in 25-5, he was 4-1 in the UFC, beating guys like Simi Schilt, Gan McGee. He wins the title, and then from Randy Couture, and then just bounces on the UFC. So this is like another guy who said, F you, UFC, I'm going elsewhere with my talents. So
he failed a drug test, didn't he? Didn't he fail it? There's many, so it's hard to remember. But after the Couture loss, didn't he fail a drug test after the Couture fight?
He failed a lot of drug tests.
It's hard to remember when exactly it is, but maybe I'm wrong. But I thought that Barnett did. Well, you're looking that up. I'll throw this in here. Well, an interesting aspect here. You'll note that this is the third from the top fight here, and they've all been heavyweight fights. And that was like a big selling point of Affliction, because it was really all about, like, this is the heavyweight division, and like this is where like the top heavyweights in the world are. Because the UFC heavyweight division was kind of hot garbage at this point. They had Couture ostensibly as the champion, but he was, like we talked about before, his contract status was up in the air. They had Big Nog as the interim champ, who was good. That's great, respectable. But then after that, the rest of the like top heavyweights at the time in the UFC were like Czech Congo, Gabriel Gonzaga. I don't know. It was not impressive. Mir was not yet all the way back. Lesnar was there, but wasn't yet a beast. Carwin and Velasquez were both there, but weren't yet like, Cain Velasquez and Shane Carwin. So like the UFC heavyweight division sucked. And it's interesting that they recognize that. It's good marketing, and saying like, okay, you want to see like heavyweights, then here's like where your top heavyweights. And so they just stacked the card with it and made all three of their top fights big heavyweight showdowns.
Okay, so Josh Barnett, he TKOs Randy Couture, UFC 36 in 2002. He pops for 3 different steroids afterwards. The UFC strips him, and of course, Barnett denies, said he was being set up, and he takes his talents to Japan.
See, I feel like nowadays that probably, that's old enough that we were still a little sketchy on rules. I feel like nowadays that probably would be a no contest. Like, how's that any different than Cormier and Jones?
Right, exactly.
So he's technically the UFC heavyweight champion, but not really.
Yeah, but this whole time, like the whole drug testing situation at this point in time was so, arbitrary. It was. There's no like official sanctioning body or any rhyme or reason to who gets tested and when they get tested. It's in the dark. It's a lot of just darkness surrounding the whole thing.
It's true. Except there's one thing you can count on. which is that when push comes to shove, Josh Barnett will fail the test.
Oh yeah, 100%. Still to this day, and it's actually was the death of Affliction, but we'll get to that
Yes.
on the next show. So, okay, you got Barnett, right? He went 4-1 in the UFC, beats Couture, goes to Japan, goes 5-4 in Pride, lost to Crow Cop 3 times, which is kind of funny because they were like consecutive years. So there's like this chunk of Barnett's life where like every fall Crow Cop comes around to beat his ass. it was like clockwork. It's like, is it fall yet? Oh, Crow Cop should be coming to beat me up anytime now. But I mean, he did some really good stuff. I mean, he beat Nakamura, Big Nog, Alexander Emelianenko, Mark Hunt. So I mean, he comes in as one of the top heavyweights at this point in time.
Yeah, I mean, when you say 5-4 in Pride, it makes it sound not impressive. But to be clear, he only lost to 2 people in Pride, and they were Crow Cop and Big Nog. So that's okay.
That's as respectable as it gets.
Yeah.
So he comes in. He's got a 2-fight winning streak over Yoshida, Jeff Munson, and now he gets a chance to fight Pedro Rizzo yet again. So Rizzo comes in. He's 16-7 at the time, 9-5 UFC record. This dude's never had an easy fight, like it doesn't exist. So this stretch of fighters, I want to read this little 10-fight stretch that Pedro Rizzo went through on his way to where's it at? Okay, so he comes in, right? He faces, this is as soon as he gets to the UFC. He faces Tank Abbott, Mark Coleman, Trey Teligman, Tsuyoshi Kasaka, Kevin Randleman, Dan Severn, Josh Barnett, Randy Couture again, and Andrei Arlovski, and goes 7-3 in that stretch. Are you kidding me? This is probably one of the greatest heavyweights of all time that never won a UFC title.
Yeah. 3 shots at it, never shot at Randleman, and the 2 Couture fights, all heavyweight title shots, never quite got it done. And those are the only, like you said, 7-3. Those are the only 3. Sort of an early Uriah Faber type there. But but he's Pedro Rizzo's awesome. Great leg kicks. He's really the guy that, at least for me, he's like the guy who like introduced me to the concept of leg kicks being like a deadly weapon. And he uncorks some good ones here in this fight against Barnett. It's not enough to get the job done here because Barnett is still in a really good spot. Rizzo is most definitely past his prime here. He's not completely shot by any means, but he's not the Pedro Rizzo of old at this point.
Yeah, no, this is actually 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. This is like the middle of a 8-fight winning streak for Barnett. So this is still
right.
He's pretty peak right now.
Yeah.
And I mean, it shows in the ring. I mean, Pedro was pretty slow to the punch, real limited movement. I mean, just basically old. And, Barnett looked fresher, moving his head actually and bobbing and weaving. Like, who is this guy out here? Like, shucking and jiving. Like, shouldn't you be trying to take this guy down? But, I mean, Barnett basically was looking to stand and get the knockout. And, boy, does it come in devastating fashion. Like, Barnett, he throws out this right hand and watches how Rizzo reacts to it, and then throws the same right hand, but comes with the left hook behind it. And I mean, absolutely lays out Pedro Rizzo. I mean, cold, like head bounces off the canvas, and then Barnett comes in with some unnecessary follow-up strikes, and that was it. Josh got his revenge. Father Time reared his ugly head for Pedro Rizzo, and, fun fight. Fun, spectacular ending.
It was fun. This is the period where Barnett's looking to really develop his striking game, and he does it. He shows it off to good effect here. It's a very good performance from Josh Barnett, and it's a great performance from Josh Barnett when you consider the fact that at no point does he make it a grappling game, which is his bread and butter. It's 100% stand up, and he dominates the fight anyway. So yeah, good stuff.
Yeah, the funniest part was, so he's getting interviewed. Big John McCarthy's doing the in-cage interviews. So Big John, he comes up and he asks some question, and Barnett's just like, "You son of a bitch! You said I was going to get knocked out if I kept it on the feet. What the hell?" And just kind of like put him on blast right there. Like, it was great. Typical Josh Barnett, just kind of commanding the microphone and commanding the situation. I mean, it was awesome. That dude can just really spiel on the microphone. He's fun. Josh Barnett's fun.
He is. He is.
Okay, so after this, this moved him into a 3-fight winning streak, and he goes on to face Gilbert Ivell at Affliction 2, Day of Reckoning. Of course, we'll get to that next week. Pedro, on the other hand, I think we should shed some light on him because he went on this Legends tour where he just went around to all these different organizations fighting. I mean, so he goes on, he fights Gilbert Ivell, Jeff Munson, Gary Goodridge, Ken Shamrock, Fedor Emelianenko, and Satoshi Ishii, and then retired with a TKO win back in September of 2015. So like a true G, he went out with a knockout win. And that's so rare and so awesome when I see that, especially from Legends. So excellent career for Pedro. And go look at his resume. Like, I'll tell you this. So he's finishing up with his 20-11 record. And I guarantee you will know at least 25 of those people on that resume, like without having to look up anyone. I mean, he's fought basically everyone there was to fight at that period of time.
And he's coaching now, so he's still a relevant part of the game, doing well for himself. Yep.
Yeah. True legend, great ambassador to the sport, and like you said, introduced the world to leg kicks as being showstoppers.
Absolutely.
Super cool. Okay, so before that, we're going to drop down to the featherweight division. We saw Mark Hominick pick up a submission armbar over Savant Young. That came at 4:25 of the second round. Mark Hominick, he came in 15-8, 2-0 in the UFC already. He beat Yves Edwards and George Gurgel. He went 0-2 in the WEC, losing to Rani Yahya and Josh Grisby. Young, on the other hand, he came in 9-7 with some IFL experience, some WEC experience. Lost to guys like Jason Von Flew and John Alessio, Chris Lytle. He's kind of like this short, stocky bowling ball almost, like built like a T-Rex. Just like really short arms, and it really did him a disservice in this fight. Mark, he pretty much just pecked away on the feet with, because Young's arms were kind of too short to connect basically, and he didn't have the footwork to match Hominick. And I mean, it was a good showing from Hominick here. I mean, he did pretty good. He spent some time on his back, but the way he set up the finish here was absolutely phenomenal.
This is interesting. Yeah, the finish is great because Hominick is known as a striker. He's a very good striker, trained under the late Sean Tompkins, who's a great, excellent striking coach, and that was his real forte. But he did have a very good submission game that he showed off from time to time. And here, it's really nice. Gets him on the ground and sort of moves back and forth between the triangle and the armbar and cinching this a little bit. And like you said, Young is this tiny little bowling ball man, so he's very hard to get in the triangle. And Hominick just sort of keeps it's nice. He just uses his legs to kind of move him and twist him around until he's got the arm bar and he's able to get him out of there. It's a really nice performance from Hominick. I feel like it's interesting. I feel like those top 3 fights are awesome, and there's some good stuff still here on the undercard. But more of these undercard fights, and this is one of them, more of these seem a little bit set on like one guy. There's a kind of clear A side and B side to a lot of these fights, and this is one of them. Like, this seemed like it was sort of set up for a Hominick win, and that's what we got. So it's not bad. It's a fine performance, but there's not a tremendous amount of drama, I don't think, to this one.
Yeah, definitely not any kind of drama. But Mark Hominick, he showed dimensions to his game. He showed he could be surgical on the ground also. So it was a solid win, and this started a 5-fight winning streak for Mark Hominick before returning to the UFC. But once he got to the UFC, he ended up losing 4 straight to finish out his career in 2012. Probably most notable for that gigantic hematoma he suffered when he fought Jose Aldo. That's the biggest Mark Hominick moment. And also him doing push-ups after his wins. After his fights, he would always like drop down and do like 10 push-ups or something like that. So kind of a fun guy.
Yeah.
Young, on the other hand, he went 2-1 after this, lost to Rob Emerson, but won his final fight in Bellator by knockout, and that was in 2013. So another guy going out on a W. I like that. I like seeing things like that.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Mark Hominick. He never quite made it all the way to the very top, but he's one of my personal faves. Like that guy a lot.
Yeah. seemed like a clean guy, good ambassador for the sport, and super tech.
Yeah.
He's like super technical. Okay, so before that, we had Hanato Babalu Sobral defeated Mike Whitehead by unanimous decision. Babalu, of course, known for his submission grappling, came in 32-7. He went 6-4 in the UFC. Already fought Hendo and Shogun and Fedor. He's been knocked out twice by Chuck at this point. Probably his claim to fame is getting kicked in the head by Chuck Liddell, unfortunately, which is sad because he's been in some really excellent fights and had some really good finishes. This point in time is like Babalu's is like the middle of his career resurgence. So he got kicked out of the UFC for not letting go of choke after the dude tapped out. I guess he had some bad blood with David Heath, and I guess he called him a motherfucker. And so Babalu felt like he should put him to sleep after Heath tapped. So the UFC, we can't have that in here. If you're not going to let go of your holds, you got to go. And so this is Babalu coming back, and typical Babalu fashion.
Yeah, and he just kind of does what needs to be done here. This is this one goes to the decision, and it's not a particularly thrilling fight. Whitehead. Whitehead's kind of he's a competent fighter. He's been around the block for sure. He was on the UFC. He's on Ultimate Fighter season 2, and has been around, so he knows what he's doing in there. He just doesn't, but he's a step below. It's that tricky spot where he's a step below Babalu. Like Babalu's just the superior fighter, but Whitehead is skilled enough to kind of hang in there. And it ends up, going to the decision. I think one of the things I like about Whitehead, he is, like I said, guy who's been around for a long time, fought like a whole ton of people. You mentioned, Pedro Hizzo's early streak there. Looking up the record of Mike Whitehead, I see that on his second night ever as a fighter, as a pro fighter, he finds himself in the ring with Tim Sylvia. And then the next night, his third ever night, he's in some sort of tournament where he finds himself in the ring with Ben Rothwell and then Tim Sylvia again. So for fights 2, 3, and 4 of your pro career to go against Tim Sylvia, Ben Rothwell, and Tim Sylvia, that's rough.
Not to mention those happened within 24 hours of each other.
Within 24 hours of each other, and he beats Ben Rothwell. So that's so hats off to Mike Whitehead for that. That's impressive. But yeah, to be totally honest with you, I remember very little about this fight. It's kind of the one that just didn't. There's just not a lot going on in it.
No, it was pretty stale. The only real highlights are Babalu taking advantage of it not being a cage and it being a ring with ropes. Is whenever Whitehead would come in for the takedown, Babalu would just jump a guillotine and fall out of the ropes.
Yeah,
and the result would be them starting from a standing position. And it's like, what a smart idea. Oh, I got this guy that wants to take me down and can take me down. Oh, I know. I'll just glitch out and go outside of the ring to get the automatic stand-up. Like, what a veteran move here.
Yeah, crafty, sneaky veteran stuff.
Yeah, that was probably the coolest part of the whole fight. Yeah. I won't be mad if you don't go back and rewatch this one. That's for sure. So Babalu, he goes on to tangle with Sokaju at the next Affliction card. We'll cover that next week, of course. Whitehead, on the other hand, he goes on to actually beat Kevin Randleman in Strikeforce before getting KO'd by King Mo. And he didn't do too much after that. He picked up some wins over Chase Gormley and Eddie Sanchez in some regional action. Had his last belt in December of 2015, dropping a decision. So, interesting career for Mike Whitehead. Very quiet career, despite having fought some really top names.
Yeah.
Okay, so before that, that's almost kind of similar to the Babalu one in terms of not that much going on, is Matt Lindland defeating Fabio Nascimento by unanimous decision. This was in the middleweight division. Lindland came in 20-5 at this point, sporting a 9-3 UFC record, which, looking back, blew my mind. Like, dude was 9-3 in the UFC. Like, where was I for this? But like, he had wins over Pat Miletich and Carlos Newton and Jeremy Horn and Phil Baroni, and coming off of a armbar loss to Fedor in a fun fight where he actually cut Fedor right off the bat with an overhand right. But yeah, his opponent Fabio, he came in 8-3. This was his first big stage fight. He did have a win over Ron Carniero, lost to Damian Maia and Husamar Paul Harris, which is funny because those are guys complete on the opposite ends of the jiu-jitsu spectrum. So he did have some experience against solid competition, but he just wasn't ready for what Lindland was bringing to the table here.
No, and Matt Lindland was just a grinding machine. He's just a guy, old school Team Quest guy who just went in there and just ground you into dust. And it's good. I was not as down on this fight. I found it lags at the end because Lindland is coming back from some ring rust here, so he gets pretty gassed by the end. So the latter half of the fight is pretty boring. But in the beginning, I watched this fight yesterday, which was the day after UFC 219. So it made me think, not at the same level, to be clear, not at the same level, but at the beginning of this made me think a little bit of Khabib Nurmagomedov, where that shows that like a grinding ground and pound can be really entertaining because Lindland is just being mean and just putting it on him in the beginning here. And again, I'm not saying that he's at that same level of Khabib, but it's that same kind of style of man, I am gonna make this grind like painful and just dominant and just beat you up in it. He cannot sustain it for 3 rounds at this point in his career, but so again, it gets a little boring at the end. But I found the beginning really entertaining.
Yeah, and even the second round. I mean, I actually gave the second round to Fabio. I feel like he hurt Lindland early in that round, and I feel like on damage alone, it was enough to win the round.
Yeah.
The third round, it became like a sloppy brawl, which was kind of cool. And it's like Lindland was gassed, and he's like throwing these strikes, and Fabio's gassed too. But like he's got this like labored head movement, but it's still enough to work. Like it's funny. It's like this dude should be a sitting duck, but he's not because the striking of Lindland isn't exactly top notch, so to speak.
Right.
But it was a cool fight. Fabio did a good job of staying vertical down the stretch and stuffing some takedowns. So it was a typical Matt Lindland fight. I always remember rooting against Matt Lindland. He KO'd Pat Milicic, which I didn't like, and so I was stoked when Murilo Bustamante choked him out in the next fight. And then he beat Ivan Salivary, who I was a big fan of. And then he knocked himself out against fellow Nico Vitali. David Terrell KO'd him. So I really wasn't a fan of Lindland at this point.
I was pro Lindland due to the Team Quest connection. I'm a big Hendo fan. I'm a big Couture fan. And so Lindland had my love for that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm past that point now. I definitely respect Lindland to no end at this point and appreciate him now looking back. But at the time, he was always killing my buzz because I knew what he was coming to do, and it wasn't finishing.
Fair, that's fair.
So Lindland would be in for a little bit of a rude awakening in his follow-up showing for Affliction, facing Vitor Belfort. But we'll talk about that scary moment next week. Fabio, on the other hand, went on to do absolutely nothing, a couple M1 fights, but that was basically it for him.
Yeah.
Okay, so we had Little Nog taking on Edwin DeWeese and destroyed him by TKO at 4 minutes and 6 seconds into the opening round. This was a light heavyweight bout, which is crazy because when I think of Edwin DeWeese, I don't think of light heavyweight, right? Like he just always seemed like a smaller guy to me for whatever reason. But this is Nogueira came in 13-3. His first main stage appearance since getting brutally knocked out by Sokaju at Pride 33, the Death of Pride that we covered last time. So this is him getting back in the saddle, taking on someone with a somewhat of a name, I guess, or at least someone who's actually been there before, not just someone on the regional scene. DeWeese, on the other hand, 34-12 coming in, all sorts of experience, 0-2 in the UFC, lost on Tough for the comeback. He was subbed by Chris Lieben, which you don't want to get subbed by Chris Lieben. Akiyama did, but that was at a different point in time. And he was TKO'd by Rich Franklin, which what do you expect? All right, the fight itself. DeWeese comes out, spamming all these sorts of weird body and leg kicks and kind of looked like he didn't even want to be in the fight. Like there's a moment where he's like backed up in the corner and like puts both his hands on the rope and does like this, scared for my life teep kick kind of thing. And, he falls to his back and you don't want to fall to your back against Nogueira. That's like the worst thing you could ever do. And, Nogueira just really had his way. He did really well in the tie clinch. He flurried on Deweese, dropped him into fetal mode with the left hand, and then some academic ground strikes. And Deweese just was completely outclassed and really had no business fighting Little Nog here.
Yeah, with Little Nog, you sometimes get more of a grappling jiu-jitsu matchup, and sometimes you get him more showing off his boxing, which is really good. And I actually prefer the boxing Little Nog myself. And this was one of those boxing ones where he really just shows off a very impressive striking game and just takes Deweese apart with relative ease, which was nice to see again in light of the fact that he had just gotten completely wrecked by Sokoju. So seeing him come back and have that success and just do what he needed to get the job done here, it's impressive. It's a really good performance. It's just technical and straightforward and simple, and just a dude going out there and executing the game plan really well.
Yeah, and this was Little Nog went on a crazy little streak after this.
Yeah.
He goes on, he fights in Sengoku before facing Vladimir Matyushenko in Affliction 2, which we'll talk about later. And then, of course, going on to the UFC, and most recently popping hot for USADA for a scheduled fight with Jared Cannonier that was supposed to take place back in December. So he's going through his USADA situation now. Hopefully that all pans out. I think it was a tainted supplement situation, which seems to be everyone's go-to.
Yeah.
Deweese, on the other hand, didn't do a single thing after this.
Deweese is one of those dudes in that our boy Wes Sims. He's in that kind of mold of just like you look at his. Like, I feel like there's this sort of category of guys from this
like
time.
Marvin Eastman.
Yeah. They just fight all sorts of weird dudes. Like his Deweese's resume is full with just weird dudes. Like Shannon Rich is in there, but so's Joe Stevenson, and like it's all over the place. It's
Drew Fickett.
Yeah, it's crazy. He's got all kinds of bizarre fights on there. It's got a weird resume.
He even had a fight with Antonio McKee.
Sure, why not?
Wow.
Why not? Strange dudes.
Okay, well, it looks like he hung it up in 2014. He got, after back-to-back knockouts, Deweese went ahead and called it a career. Probably for the better. I don't ever remember seeing him win a fight, actually, now that I think about it.
It's a good point. I can't either.
Not even trying to be mean. Just I legit can't. Okay, so before that, we had pre-mullet Mike Pyle. He defeated J.J. Ambrose by submission, a rear naked choke at 2 minutes and 51 seconds of the opening round. Pyle coming in 16-5-1. Pre-mullet, like I said, but he had already faced guys like Rampage and John Fitch and Jake Shields. Comes out, he has Randy Couture in his corner, Jay Huron, and it's funny, the announcer, I forget which one said it, but he goes, Mike Pyle, a crafty veteran, and I'm just like, that's funny. They're calling Mike Pyle a crafty veteran before his UFC run.
Yeah,
like, that's humorous to me because that's all he was in the UFC was the crafty veteran. And I'm a huge Mike Pyle fan. Ambrose, on the other hand, he came in 10-2, some regional experience, but that's about it. This was a pretty much a clinic for Mike Pyle. It was like a gimme, basically.
Yeah, workman-like performance. You go out there, like we said about Nog, you go out there, you do what needs to get done, and you do it well. And Pyle is a guy, he's just one of those guys who just is just an all-around good fighter. There's just not, there's not these glaring weaknesses. Unless you are able to do something to him, he's just gonna implement his game and do whatever he wants. And Ambrose just doesn't have any sort of particular thing that he has to offer Pyle. So he gets taken down, he gets subbed, and that's the end of the game.
Yeah, Pyle, he's one of those rare cases where it's like he's good everywhere, but he's also dangerous everywhere.
Yeah.
He can knock you out on the feet with like a knee or a hook or whatever, but on the same token, he will submit you with who knows what on the ground. And I feel like his nickname of Quicksand is absolutely perfect, especially in this situation here, because, you know, that's kind of what happened. Ambrose, he tried to get a takedown and fell right into the quicksand. And that was the thing. Like, he initiated the clinch. And it's like, well, you pick how you're going to lose. And once you're in the quicksand, struggling is just going to make it worse. And,
Yeah.
And that's exactly what happened here. So it was fun looking back and seeing a younger Mike Pyle, you know, pre-mullet, still being as nasty as ever, still just a technical wizard everywhere. And, you know, much respect to him. He put up a nice 10-8 record in the UFC, retired in 2016 after back-to-back knockout losses. But, I mean, he's one of those guys who have fought a lot of people, finished a lot of people. And I think he might even be more well-known for his wars in the gym. Like, he's one of those gym heroes who nobody wanted to spar with that guy. Like, he sparred, like, he was one of those, like, you hear about these people who just, when it comes to sparring, you just want to avoid that guy. And that was Mike Pyle.
Yep.
So,
you're right. He's a young, crafty veteran here.
Yeah, yeah. Cool to see, though. I'm a big Pyle fan. I'm glad that he's done fighting, though, because he was really getting knocked out brutally there at the end.
It gets rough at the end.
So for JJ Ambrose, he kind of bounced around everywhere, all over the world. He's now 29-7, and he's actually slated to fight Saad Awad at Bellator 193 on the 26th. So he's still around and kicking, and has a big stage fight coming up.
There you go.
Okay, so before this, we have my favorite fighter of all time in Vitor Belfort, picking up one of the most beautiful knockouts you'll ever see at 3 minutes and 12 seconds of the second round. This was a middleweight fight. Middleweight Vitor, crazy dangerous. So he's coming in 16-8. This is after his decision loss to Dan Henderson at Pride 32, which was in Las Vegas. He went on and had 2 cage rage fights for whatever reason before finally landing in Affliction, and actually had Randy Couture in his corner, which is a little surprising because, of course, they exchanged titles back in the UFC. So that was, you know, kind of unique to see.
Yeah, and, you know, much like we talked about with Arlovski earlier, this is an important career moment for Vitor here. This is a real resurgence for him. Now, Vitor has had about 3,000 career resurgences of the old Vitor is back. You know, Vitor is back. But this was an important career resurgence because this is not a resurgence of the old Vitor is back. Like, when you hear about that, the old Vitor, what you're thinking about is his destruction of Vanderlei Silva, right? Is him just charging across the ring and blitzing dudes. And every couple of years, he would have another one of those performances, and everybody would yell about it. Like the Marvin Eastman one is a good example of that. And those would come and go. But here is where he did kind of the same thing that I feel like Robbie Lawler did in his career. And the kind of that we were talking about with Arlovski before, where he's sort of like, okay, maybe I don't have to only win a fight in the first 30 seconds. Like, maybe it's okay to be patient and to, like, wait for the KO and to sort of to bide my time and to be a more technical striker and to trust that the KO will come. And I feel like that's what he's learning at this exact moment here with the cage rage fights and then with this fight as well. He's being more patient. He's waiting. He still gets the devastating knockout here. It's brutal, but it's not until the second round. And that's okay. He's waiting. And that would serve him really well because it's not long after this that he finds himself in the UFC and ultimately, you know, and ultimately getting to that title shot with Anderson Silva, and having a really good late run that is not reliant on blitzkrieg Vitor. It's a different kind of Vitor.
Yeah, and you know, and that was awesome for me as a huge Vitor fan. Like I, you know, say all the time. Like, I remember this pay-per-view. I ordered this pay-per-view when it happened, and seeing this fight just made me so joyous.
Yeah,
you know, just because, you know, watching him lose to Dan Henderson really killed my buzz. Like, that really just pissed me off. And I'm just like, man, Vitor, what happened to you? You shell of your former self, you know? And then dropping down to middleweight was an excellent idea. Mm-hmm. You know, that was, he really is someone who carried around way too much muscle, like legitimately carried around too much muscle for his frame. And his cardio suffered from it. You know, And that could be why he, felt like he had to get people out of there in 30 seconds because, all that muscle, you got nothing in the third round.
Yeah.
So this was huge for Vitor. He came out methodical, like you're saying, and a bit of a slow round. And you had Martin coming forward looking to bomb and Vitor playing the outside, looking to counter, not being aggressive. And then you had the second round comes and Vitor kicks the body and gets taken down, but he gets back up, throws like a flying knee, and then he comes in with like this, it's a right uppercut, left cross, because Vitor's a southpaw. And, I mean, he knocks Martin out cold. So Martin is like sitting unconscious, eyes open through the ropes, and like you can tell, like his eyes are open, but like there is nothing there. He's just, I mean, it looks like someone propped up a ventriloquist dummy. Like he was not there whatsoever. I mean, it was brutal. That southpaw cross of Vitor is one of the most deadliest strikes in all of MMA. It's right there with Krokop's left head kick. It's a problem. It's definitely a problem. So huge win for Vitor here. I mean, huge. And Martin this was basically a Martin performance. He's kind of known for getting brutally knocked out. So he was on par for this fight.
There are just some of those dudes who are out there that for whatever reason, when they get knocked out like crazy spectacularly. There are so many Terry Martin knockouts that you're like, oh my God, like the James Irvin one and this one and Lieben and I think Scott Smith had one where like he doesn't just get knocked out. He gets like knocked flat, like his head's bouncing off the ground. I mean, it's nasty. I don't know why some dudes just get knocked out like that, but when they do, it's rough. So Terry Martin appears on a lot of people's highlight reels.
It's like Martin, Marvin Eastman, Pat Barry's unfortunately in that category.
Yeah, Pat Barry totally is in that category. Absolutely. Yeah.
But Vitor looked really good here. It's a patient Vitor, a new weight class for Vitor, and we saw that his power followed him down to 185. So I think that was huge. And like we said earlier, Vitor goes on to face Matt Lindland in his next fight in Affliction, and that is one of the scariest fights. That's one of the fights. I mean, we'll talk about it next week, but that's just one of the fights where, I said that I never really rooted for Matt Lindland, but like when you see someone down for an extended period of time, you start to feel for them, and you kind of come back down to reality. Like, hey, yeah, this is a sport or whatever, but like, people's lives are on the line here.
Yeah. So
crazy. I don't want to give away too much, but Vitor's a scary mother effer. We'll just say that.
Yeah.
Martin, he went on to get brutally knocked out a whole bunch more times. And I think he just got knocked out this past December with a knee. So he's still out there getting dusted in case anyone's looking out for him. Yeah, and he's like all over the place, fighting everywhere, different countries, and
sure.
I don't know. I worry about people like that who just won't call it a quit. They won't call it quits, even though they just get posterized time after time after time.
Yeah.
All right, so opening up the card, we have Paul Bonatello defeating your boy, Big Daddy, Gary Goodridge, by unanimous decision. This was odd because, number one, Goodridge came in on 1 day's notice, replacing Alexander Emelianenko. So finding someone in that short of a time frame is crazy, let alone one of the pioneers, one of the legends of the sport. So kudos to them for actually pulling this fight off and making it happen. A little odd note, there was a huge delay. So like both fighters come out, right, and they're just kind of standing in the ring, but the like cage side physician wasn't ready, like he was still preparing or something like that. So there's just like this crazy delay where like no one knows what's going on, and the fighters, like Gary Goodridge lays down and he's like stretching and stuff, and you're just like, man, these fighters are getting cold out here. Like this isn't good. And you hear like the commentary, like they don't know they're live on their microphones, and it's like, oh no, tell me this is not how this pay-per-view is gonna go. You know what I mean? You start getting a little nervous for this new promotion that's trying to compete with the UFC, dumped all this money into this, and it had a really rocky start. But they cleaned it up, and the fight took place, and it was a fight. Kind of felt like a sparring match a bit. What'd you think of this one?
It's really weird. It's a weird fight. Before I tell you what I think of the fight, I cannot support your legend status for Paul Buentello. I apologize.
No. Gary
Sorry,
Goodrich
Paul
is the
Buentello.
legend.
Oh, okay, good. All right.
No. Gary Goodrich. So Paul Buentello was originally supposed to face Alexander
I see. Yeah.
Emelianenko pulled out. So they went and they found a legend. They found,
I'm down with
pioneer of the sport in Gary Goodrich.
You know I love me some Big Daddy. I'm a big fan of Gary Goodrich. So that I support 100%. Yeah, this fight's weird. It's weird from the get-go. So it's supposed to, like you said, it's supposed to be Buentello versus Alex Emelianenko. He gets booted because he can't pass his medicals. California won't say exactly why, but it's assumed over the years that it was due to a hepatitis issue, but that's never been confirmed because California won't say. That's just what is out there. So instead we get this on one day's notice. Like you said, it's got that weird beginning. And then it's just a weird fight. It does really feel like a sparring session. Like there's all these moments in it. The commentary team mentions it a bunch of times where Buentello will get Goodrich in a really bad position. Like he'll get him in the corner, like in the corner in a like tie plum, and then he'll just kind of let go and like walk away and just sort of be like do and like go back to the middle of the ring for them to sort of throw little pitter pats again. I have to admit, a part of me absolutely questioned if Buentello. This is in the midst of Gary Goodrich's lengthy losing streak that led to the end of his career. And Gary Goodrich is now a guy who talks about sort of the struggles of brain damage that comes with being in a sport like this. I have to admit, there is a large part of me that was watching this and thinking, is Buentello intentionally going really, really soft on a guy he respects here? Because there seems to be a lot of times that he could pour it on and put Goodrich out, and he just chooses not to, and just chooses to kind of like let it be sparring that he still wins, but he wins without really hurting Gary Goodrich all that much.
Yeah, and that's really not Buentello's MO. Like Buentello came in as an unassuming guy who could throw his hands.
Yeah.
Like really big knockout power. And like he actually had a crazy run making it up to Affliction. So he came in winning 10 of his last 12, and that's across the UFC and Strikeforce. Knockout wins over the late Justin Eilers, Tank Abbott, Mike Kyle, even challenged Arlovski for the UFC belt. Even though he got knocked out in like one of the quickest knockouts I've ever seen, like just the one punch KO of all time. And a recent knockout loss to Alistair Overeem in Strikeforce. But I mean, he was still a dangerous fighter, and so it was a little odd to see this as a sparring match. But I mean, maybe that was the case, that he just, he understood the situation. Like, we got this legend coming in. I can get an easy win. Like, he's not really dangerous at this point. I don't need to go and do that to someone that I don't want to say care about, but someone who
I respect.
Yeah, someone that holds that kind of place.
Yeah. So it was weird. It's not a great fight. It's bad, but it's just weird. Paul Buentello, you're right. He had a lot of stuff in his career. My personal favorite Paul Buentello moment is one of my favorite moments in all of MMA.
The fear of the consequences.
What's that?
When he asked the crowd to like,
yeah, the best. I think it's UFC 57, and he wins, and he's got his catchphrase, and he's like, I got to do this, crowd. I don't even remember what it was. Don't hate the.
It's like, don't fear me.
Yeah, don't fear
the consequences.
Me. And then like he hopes the crowd is going to say just dead silence. He's like, oh, I'm like, no, Paul, they don't know your catchphrase, dude. Like, they don't know what it is. You're not Steve Austin. You're not The Rock. They're not about to chant along with you. But he really thought that crowd was going to cheer with him, and they didn't. It's such an amazing moment of just like, ugh.
Illusions of grandeur.
It's so great.
The face palm, like, no, you didn't.
Yeah. Oh, it's
career though for Buentello. He had a decent career. I think he's still active. But after this, he went on to face Baby Fedor at Affliction 2. Of course, we'll get to that next week. And I guess you'll see a lot of the same guys on this card on the follow-up card. Gary, of course, went on to lose 4 more before making it 7 losses in a row and retiring in 2010. A pioneer. I know he's your boy. He's just, I can't remember him winning a fight outside of the UFC when he had that crucifix elbow situation. He's got. I love Gary Goodridge. I always have this like the schema in my mind of Gary Goodridge is him losing, like and not bad, just always losing decisions and stuff.
I know what you're saying. I mean, we've talked about him once before, and the last time that we talked about him, it was oh no, the last time we talked about him, he won.
Did he win?
It was the Taktarov fight from Pride 1.
Okay.
When he starched Oleg Taktarov. There we go.
That was brutal.
We discussed the victory, probably the greatest victory in the career of Gary Goodridge. So there we go.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
But what a good card, what a cool debut of a new promotion that I feel like really overachieved. All in all, I mean, it was a solid card. It was backed with a huge budget. They brought in the big names that were outside of the UFC. They had stars in attendance. There was a Megadeth concert going on. They even had Fairtex gloves. Like you never see like you don't see equipment companies sponsoring to that level. Like I've never seen anything other than a promotion's name on the gloves. Even thinking back way back when, even those gloves were all just like black or So to see Fairtex specifically on the gloves was a little different. It makes me wonder if they actually sponsored the event or what the deal was with that. But I mean, this card holds up. Almost a decade later, it's still a fun card to watch. Seeing Prime Fedor smash a former UFC champion in under a minute was incredible and just really added to the mystique of Fedor. Arlovski making his way back up to the top was fun to see. Knocking out Ben Rothwell is tough. And there was even a moment in that fight where like Arlovski hits him with this overhand right and then like blood splatters on the camera lens. And then they cut to that camera and it's like, oh, it was such an epic like MMA moment. The blood on the camera and it was just it was pretty cool. And then you got Josh Barnett back on US soil, getting revenge on Pedro Hizzo, knocking him out in epic fashion. Like, what a great non-UFC card.
Yeah, it was really good. And at the end of this, I feel like, the future feels positive for Affliction. And it feels like, oh, I got to see more from these guys. So it's a good, it's a good debut for sure. If you want to watch the whole show is, of course, on Fight Pass. If you don't have time to watch the whole thing, what I would say for those interested is to watch the 3 heavyweight fights at the top and to watch the Vitor fight. Those are the ones that are the real takeaways from here. The other one, there's other good fights too, but if you're limiting yourself to a couple, those are the 4 I'd recommend.
Yeah, those are definitely must-sees.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that is our show, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for tuning in. Fraser, thank you so much for joining me on this New Year's Day.
Absolutely.
You can follow Fraser on Twitter at FCoffeine. You can follow me on Twitter at @TheEddieMercado. You can read us both over at BloodyElbow.com. If you like the show, smash that like button. It's the thumbs up down below. Also, subscribe to MMANation.com on YouTube. That's DOTCOM. Tell us about your favorite early MMA moments in the comments section. Tell us what other events you would like us to cover because there are many. There are many, many to get to. Do us another favor and whitelist us on your ad blockers so we can keep this content regular and free. And we'll be back next Monday on the 8th for the conclusion of our 2-part Affliction series. We'll be covering Day of Reckoning, which saw Fedor Emelianenko posterize Andrei Arlovski in epic fashion. Arlovski, another one of those guys who gets knocked out in spectacular fashion, unfortunately. And yeah, I guess that's it. Happy New Year, and we'll see you next time. I'll go be a good person.